So I'm Dr. Yaw Bediako, CEO and co-founder of Yemaachi Biotech. I think Ghana has a young but growing health tech space. I mean, Yemaachi, we're not really health tech, we are biotech, which is sort of another niche area, which is even less common on the continent. But I think in general, we've found Ghana has been a good ecosystem for us to at least grow from. We are very Pan-African in our focus. So we've never really focused entirely just in Ghana. It's a great place to be based, but we're a smaller country, smaller population, smaller market. So Yemaachi has always been very Africa focused, but I think it's certainly nice to be based out of Ghana. Even travel from here to Europe to America is convenient. Travel to other parts of Africa is quite convenient as well. So logistically, I think it provides certain advantages, but we're always looking to build partnerships across the continent. I think it's probably like many African countries, there's a need for investment in different sectors in the healthcare space. I mean, ranging from healthcare provision all the way to, I guess, health tech, biotech companies. I mean, Yemaachi is, like I said before, we don't really focus entirely just on Ghana. We don't really build solutions for Ghana. That's not our business is doing research, leveraging relationships we build in Ghana and outside Ghana to really build solutions that are global in focus. So we're a little bit different in that regard from companies that are looking to address local issues, which are also important. So there are myriad issues across Africa with healthcare provision, with access to drugs, with there are telemedicine initiatives, there are tech-enabled pharmacy initiatives that are like N-Pharma, which is probably Ghana's most successful sort of startup, and N-Pharma obviously has presence in multiple African countries.
Yes.
But Yemaachi, we are solving cancer, and cancer doesn't have national boundaries. And we are trying to position ourselves as the African cancer company, looking not just to try to tackle cancer as an issue on the African continent, but really our goal is to bring Africa into the global discussion about research on cancer. So leveraging African genetic diversity, African research insights into global discussions about how to treat cancer across the world. So we are a little bit different. And so that means, we even though we are working from Ghana, we are not just working in Ghana. But I think there's a need for a mixture. I think the biggest challenges you have, not just in Ghana, but elsewhere, is access to patient capital to allow you to build your innovations, to build your solutions, and to have time to test, figure out what doesn't work, and keep going. Founders in Europe, North America have certain leeway and time that many African founders do not have. Because we don't have the same access. And so you have to be generating revenue quicker. You have to show revenue traction quicker and more substantial traction than you might be asked for at this particular stage of your evolution elsewhere. And so that means in some ways it can stunt your growth because you have to focus your business around clear capital point and revenue generation, as opposed to being able to focus almost entirely on innovation and the big idea. And so I think African founders have that challenge where how can you keep your eye focused on your North Star, but still generate enough revenue, enough traction to keep current investors happy and attract additional investment. So that is always the challenge that we have there. I mean, if you're investing in a hospital or investing in pharmacies, those are more traditional businesses. You may not have to do that as patient. 3-5 years, you should be able to see good returns. If you're investing in biotech, it doesn't matter where you're in Africa or you're in America, you have to be patient 8 to 10 years. And that is not just an Africa thing. So I don't think necessarily the problem is not that you have to be patient in Africa. It is that certain sectors require patience. And currently those sectors are not well represented in Africa. So I don't think we are slower. About a company yes, we face certain unique challenges, of course. But when I ask for patient capital, it's not because I'm here, it's because I'm biotech. And I'm pretty much asking for the same conditions that I would get if I was in Boston or San Francisco. The problem is, in this part of the world, I don't get that leeway. So that is really what we're asking for. As biotech companies trying to emerge in Africa, we're asking for similar terms, similar attitudes towards us as what is, people raise $30 million seed rounds in biotech in Silicon Valley. And in Africa, you're lucky to raise above a $4 or $5 million seed. Now, $30 million seed allows you certain room to mature your idea, grow gradually, build up your business. That a $3 million seed doesn't, right? So we get smaller rounds and then we get less patience. So we get hit on both sides. And I think that it's partly probably just going to come with time as investors in Africa begin to get more familiar with other sectors like biotech. But I think, we need African-focused investors to begin to look beyond the traditional sectors we've always invested in. And perhaps we need biotech investors who've never looked at Africa to also begin to look at Africa. So, hopefully the combination of those factors will begin to create more awareness about what biotech offers and how to invest in biotech companies. Typically, real estate is viewed as a safe bet. I think it has to do with familiarity. So there are not that many biotech companies in Africa that have succeeded so far. So when investors are looking for comps or comparables, it's difficult to find. Yemaachi is one of the first of its kind on the continent. Our success will hopefully probably open the way for others to follow who would have an easier time in such a way, but maybe makes it somewhat challenging for data to go out of the continent, right? So you create a moat to promote inter-Africa movement. And then if it has to go outside, and that's where you put a premium to that, which allows your African companies to now be competitive. Because people cannot just come and take data and go. They have to work with local partners. But in that case, then the local partner is able to charge a premium. And so now your African data businesses are growing. But those businesses also have to also be scientifically robust. You cannot just have a bunch of people saying, well, you need to collect data because data is valuable. So if you're only getting 4 or 5%, that 4 or 5% does not include the niche that is biotech. If you go to the US, big VC market, then a certain segment goes towards biotech. So perhaps we need to get beyond a certain critical mass as an investment sort of ecosystem to then begin to carve out these more specialized areas like biotech investing. But I think you are right. The opportunity is there. Africa is uniquely suited to biotech for a variety of reasons. The upside is very high. Yes, it's risky, but that's venture. Like you said, some of these real estate deals end up not working out. So there's risk everywhere. But I really think it is maybe people, founders like me and others in the space need to be engaging more and trying to educate investors. But then we also need a few success stories to pin that pitch on. And so it's very difficult when you're one of the first. You have to be the success to open the way for others to follow you. So I hope that's what we can achieve. But for the sector to grow, we certainly need a lot more local money to go into it. And so my hope is that will begin to happen. I mean, we could talk about 23andMe and where they went wrong. I mean, or why they've not had the success people thought they would have. They had certain amounts of success at certain point. And I think the question is, did they not plan enough for the future? Right. But I also think even from the very beginning, from my just outsider perspective, there was certain amounts of underestimation of what you actually need. You have to be very careful not to oversimplify human health data business. Not all data is as useful as others, or you need a certain level of completeness of data. And it's also, research is not always predictable. So I think you have to, if you're going to try to build a business around data, you have to, from the very, very beginning, begin to ask those research questions. You need to put yourself in the position of a researcher, of an end user, of big pharma or biotech, whoever is going to do that R&D. And then you need to work backwards to try to do that. Many people don't. Many people start saying, well, we just need to collect data. And there are examples of that in Africa. And also, I think in some ways, 23andMe was guilty of that in oversimplifying what you actually need to generate a product. So, because your data is valuable, provided people believe they can use it to generate products. So if pharma thinks we can get a new drug out of this data, then its value rises. The moment pharma begins to doubt how much they will get out of your data, then it begins to drop. So we saw that with 23andMe. They had massive multi-$100 million deals for data. But over a number of years, pharma failed to manage to develop a product from that. And so that then began to affect the value of the data going forward. Now, I would say that was because from the very, very beginning, they perhaps did not have as complete a data set as they thought. You had genomes, but do you have someone's clinical data? Do you understand what has happened to that person based on that genome? And a genome alone perhaps is not enough. You need to think of other data sets, other omics data sets that point towards a drug or a diagnostic. So it's not trivial. The point I'm trying to make is it can be simplified and almost too simplified. The key to success is to strategically have a line of sight to the product. The data itself is a means to an end. So your business may be around the commercialization of data, but the success of that business depends on someone's ability to develop a product. And so you need to build your whole framework around what will my data be used for. And so you need to have a robust enough scientific team. You need to have a robust enough scientific hypothesis yourself. Yeah. Even if you are not the person going to do the product development, you almost put yourself in those shoes. And then you build the data set that you would need to develop a product. And I think if you can do that, then you are more likely to succeed. So I think it's a challenging business. It's one that can be very lucrative. And Africa, based on our genetic diversity, based on our biodiversity in plants and other organisms, we have a huge opportunity. But we cannot just come and think we can just harvest and commercialize. You have to think through it. Now, you asked about government. I think government has a role to play, especially in the areas of regulation. So there's also there's a huge ethical component to this. And there is growing sentiment globally about what are the rights of an individual when it comes to their genomic information and so on. So I think it would be good for African governments to educate themselves in this area, not to create legislation that blocks commerce, but legislation that protects people's rights, but then also promotes local innovation, local business in a way that builds up our ecosystem. So creating regulatory frameworks that, for instance, allow data to move across the continent. Really, in my opinion, they need to be people who are thinking like scientists. They may not all be scientists. The Yemaachi is not all scientists, but we are a scientific company. We are generating data that we are partnering with, we are looking to commercialize, but we're not our whole ethos is not just focused on the data we are commercializing. Our ethos is research. Okay. And so that means the data we generate is highly valuable because it is suitable for research. I think gradually African countries are actually beginning to tighten their regulations. For the most part, I think it's a good thing. I mean, you want to protect people. Work like this has to stand up ethically. And so, for instance, in our case, all our work, whatever project, no matter where in Africa we work, has to go through very robust ethics approval at multiple levels, institutional, sometimes at national level. The data protection, legislation and organizations, they are there to sort of, in my opinion, certify entities to be custodians of data. So when you register the Ghana Data Protection Act, they evaluate your systems. They evaluate you to see whether or not you have put in place the right systems to be a custodian of that data. So that's the first phase. Yemaachi recently, we achieved ISO 27001 for information security. Okay. We are working towards HIPAA and GDPR. So we are looking even beyond the local standards to try to be compliant with the most stringent international standards. Yeah. But all of those standards are built around what capacity have you built? How are you building your firewalls? Where do you store the data? What are the standard operating procedures you use to handle people's data to make sure as much as possible you don't have a data breach? So there is that side. I think that's where government really comes in. But there's the other side, which is the ethics. So yes, you are certified to collect data, but why are you collecting data? What are you going to do with the data? That is where the ethics frameworks come in. And certain countries have national ethics boards that review those kind of requests. Mm-hmm. And I think those two work hand in hand. I think governments should engage with organizations like ours who are in the space, understand what we do, understand how we do it, engage probably with international examples to understand international best practice, and then work together to craft a safe environment. I am all for a safe environment because bad actors will undermine what we are doing.
Sure.
So regulation, if done properly, I think is very useful for us. And we need to, I'd encourage more engagements. What we don't want though is to nationalize data to a point where it's taken away from the continent. So if Ghana says, I won't share, or, Ghana to Nigeria movement, for instance, is blocked, then that begins to work against the opportunity that we have in Africa. So like I said before, it would be great for instance, Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement or Authority to begin to think, okay, how do we think about health data? Because the strength Africa has is the huge diversity across our continent. Is there a way that, similar with what we are doing with the African Medicines Agency, bringing African FDAs under some sort of African umbrella, is there an opportunity to think of ways where we can promote intra-African collaboration when it comes to data? And like I said, in so doing, we create opportunities for African-based businesses to now be able to responsibly work with external partners in a commercial way. Mm-hmm. So I think dialogue is needed, more education is, but I think it's an important area, and an area that I think I personally and here at Yemaachi, we're very excited to engage with governments on, so that we can build a thriving ecosystem, number one, that is safe and protects the rights of our people. So no, yes, I think, coming first over to cancer. Cancer is a disease that emanates from mistakes in genes. So whether it's something you inherit or something that happens over the course of your life, cancer starts at a mutation. And so the genome is very important in not only understanding cancer, but it's really important in the initiation of cancer. And certainly then you could see how it would be important in potentially diagnosing and maybe even treating cancer. So since, from early 2000s, when the first human genome became available, genomic medicine has emerged. The idea of understanding our genomes to understand how to improve our health. Now, cancer research has benefited immensely from this genomic revolution because, as I said, cancer at its heart is a genetic disease. Now, the problem we have is that most of the genomes that have been generated have been for people of European descent. So majority of the research that has been done in genomics has featured people who are European. And only about 3% of the data is African. So 80% European, 3% African, the rest just mingled up. So that creates a significant deficit for people of African descent. Now, specifically in cancer, the newest therapies usually are focusing on specific mutations that have been found to be targetable. Now, the problem is these mutations do not occur equally in all people. Based on your genetic background, these mutations may be more or less likely to happen or to occur in an individual. So this is not so much a matter of race, right? It's really a matter of genetic diversity. And Africa has the most genetically diverse population. So we have more people who are different from each other than anywhere in the world. Europe is relatively homogeneous or similar to each other. Europeans are relatively similar to each other compared to Africans. Africans are not similar to each other at all, even though they may all be darker skinned. Yeah. That really doesn't mean much. So you have a situation where if most of the research has been done in this group of people who are quite similar to themselves, then it makes sense that what you find and the drugs you develop that are targeted to the particular variants or mutations that are in that group will not always be found in a more diverse group. So that is what we see. So there are certain diagnostic tests now, there are even certain drugs now that are indicated for breast cancer or for prostate cancer. But patients, they don't work well in all patients. Certain patients will have great responses, other patients will not. And it's usually dependent on the genetic background of those patients. So the vision of Yemaachi is, let's go to the continent with the widest variety of people. If we can develop drugs that work across those people, then those drugs will work everywhere. Yeah. So the vision of Yemaachi is, can we infuse more diversity into global research? And the best source of that diversity is the African continent. So Africa is sitting there as a continent full of diversity that has yet not been incorporated into global research. What we are trying to do is work with partners across Africa to generate that African data, not just because it's African, but because it is so diverse. And then that diverse data can now enter global research. So there is great interest. Global pharma know they need more diverse data. It's not we telling them. Scientists all over the world understand the problem they have in that most of the data they have is skewed to a particular group. So there's huge interest in trying to get more diverse data. The question has always been, how do you generate it? Our health systems are under-resourced in Africa. And so we don't organically generate this data. In America, you have cancer, you're going to get a genetic workup as part of standard of care. Mm-hmm. So that genetic data is going to be generated. And then somebody can pull it and use it for research, provided they follow the right ethical approval. In Africa, cancer patients are not going to get those tests routinely. So that data is just not going to be generated. So even though we have cancer patients, we don't have the data. So that's where Yemaachi comes in. Yemaachi is coming in to partner with hospitals in Africa to generate that data that is so required for research, and then provide that data to our partners in pharma and life science, so that now African data begins to feed into these discovery pipelines. Now, of course, our vision as a company is we don't want to just be providing data. We also want to now build capacity to do some of the research ourselves. And that's what I meant at the beginning, where I said we are focused on research. So I am generating data that I believe I will need for my research, which makes my data much more valuable than just generating data for the sake of generating data, because there's that check and balance that is happening to say, okay, if we were going to develop a drug, what data do we need? Okay, let's generate that data. We've just, this year announced a partnership with Roche. We call it the African Cancer Atlas. It's not meant to end with Roche. We're looking to have a consortium of pharma companies join us in this initiative. And really the goal is, let's once and for all generate enough data from Africa that can at least begin to do something about cancer, but do it from the continent for the continent. So that's the journey we're on. We're excited and grateful that, Roche have come on board, and we're hopeful that other pharma companies will follow suit, to allow us to have the resources required to generate a significantly large database that it potentially could really, in many ways, revolutionize how cancer drugs are developed. So that this problem that I was talking about, honestly, with the right partners, with the right work, in less than 10 years, that problem would not be a problem anymore, because we would have bridged that data gap. And now everybody will be represented in research, and drugs that come off the line will now be much more useful across different groups. Even on a small scale, with the work we've done over the last 4 years, the hospitals we're working in, there's better understanding of the cancer they've seen, right? So if we are working on a project, now we can go to certain hospital in northern Nigeria, hospital in Kenya, and they, not even us, they can pull out data thanks to the project we've done to say, oh yeah, we treated X number of people with breast cancer, and they've been sequenced, and this is the sequence. Now, we're a small company. Our projects have been relatively small, but in many places, this is the first time we've done something like this. And certainly it's the first time it's being done on the continent. So some of our partners have been involved in research studies in the past. Samples have been shipped to America, shipped to Europe as part of academic research projects. Well, that is a great start, but it is not, it leaves you wanting a little bit, because the work was not done locally and it did not build the capacity. Our work is done here. Our lab is just around the corner. The genomics that we do, which is on par with genomics you can find anywhere in the world, is done here. And we've intentionally built that capacity here. So I think there's an element of, even beyond just the data, the process of generating the data is also important. Yes. Because you could ship samples somewhere and generate your data and have the data. And so you'd have solved one problem. But if you didn't use that project as an opportunity to build local capacity, then it's a missed opportunity, because this capacity can be turned to different things. Today you are doing cancer. Tomorrow maybe it's heart disease. The people you train to sequence can sequence anything, right? So part of Yemaachi's mission is also to see this capacity built on the continent. That is why I am so committed to doing that. That's why we work so hard to try to invest and build the team to do it here, because it's not just the end product that is important. The process is just as important, because the process allows us to train, to build capacity, and to demonstrate it is doable here. It's also about the narrative, right? The narrative that Africa always needs help, the narrative that Africa cannot do certain things. We are on a mission to also change that narrative. Now, of course, we need help along the way. We work with whoever, work with Roche, work with whoever will work with us, but we're still doing it, right? And as we are helped to do it, eventually we stand on our own. And so it's recognizing that process is as important as the data at the end. In fact, in some ways, you could almost argue the process is more important than the data, because the data could be generated in many ways, but the process leaves behind infrastructure, leaves behind a narrative of Africa doing. And that to me is very powerful. And that will live longer than us, live longer than even the data. That narrative of Africa succeeding to begin to take care of its own problems, I think is something that we all want to see happen. I think ultimately it's my personal driving force. Well, I mean, 100 million is nice, but even you can do stuff with 1 million, 2 million. I mean, yes, the scale of the project is large. And of course, the bigger pot of money you get, perhaps the faster you will go. But, we recognize that we have to demonstrate traction. We cannot just be given 100 million. To be nice. And some people do get it, but in our context, you have to build. And you have to build trust and build credibility. I think, for companies like us, we understand African governments have lots of competing interests for resources. You're providing schools and roads. Basic infrastructure is still lacking in many of our countries, and that is very expensive. So I am of the mindset actually that, of course, where possible, if governments can infuse cash, we'll be grateful. But there are other things governments can do. Tax incentives, exemptions on duty. We import a lot of the inputs that we require. Are there ways for governments to give companies like us tax breaks or customs exemptions? Those would considerably reduce the cost of doing business, but would not necessarily take money out of the government's hands. I mean, of course, it is revenue that they would choose not to collect, but it's different from giving me a bunch of cats. And I think those are how we need to engage with African governments. I think the narrative for a long time has been African governments need to invest. And I acknowledge that, I agree. But I also think we have to be sensitive to the fact that there are a lot of pressing issues on governments, and investing 10, 20 million in a biotech startup that will show returns maybe in 10 years is tough for a politician to rationalize to his constituents when he's on a 4-year election cycle. Sure. They want to see a school, want to see a hospital. And then those are things they need as well. So I think we need to begin to engage with government and say, okay, if government has cash, yes, we'll take some of it. But are there other things government can do? So as I talked about, certain levers that government can use to make us more competitive, enhance cross-border collaboration, and let a company like Yemaachi, who is Pan-African in footprint, really express itself as a Pan-African. That's easy for us to move people and data across the continent, obviously within regulatory frameworks, but remove some of those barriers that cost us money, that make us less competitive. Because once again, our competitors in Europe, North America, typically they work in single countries. But America is a very big country. So there's that scale that we only achieve in Africa when we go across borders. So those borders need to allow us to do so. I think improving the regulatory framework in general helps also give us more credibility. So Ghana, we are fortunate to have a really good FDA, a very well-respected FDA. There are a number of coming up across the continent. Having that kind of regulatory structure in place means when people review your documentation and they see you have approval from a local body, they respect that local body. Yes. So I think that's another area government can work. And I think, in general, viewing biotech as something worth investing in. I think we all have to work together. My opinion, Africa is too easily labeled that you have fraud and mismanagement everywhere, but we are an easy target. And I think we need positive stories to begin to, build up a more positive image. So anything that governments can do in that area would, like I said, be certainly very welcome. And and there's also for us as entrepreneurs to also be honest, to also work hard, not to abscond with investors' money or make, everybody makes mistakes, but not make obvious mistakes or not make avoidable mistakes, because we have less margin for error. It's a bigger story when a company folds up in our context than it is in the US because there are fewer companies. Yeah. And especially in our space, there are not that many. And so I think we have to take that responsibility serious.